Okay, thank you, Louise. My name is Steve Wilson. It's an honor to be here. I teach graduate students courses on global climate change, various aspects of that, and have had the opportunity in the past to work on migrant remittances in the Inter-American Development Bank when Pedro de Vasconcelos was a colleague, and have collaborated since his tenure at EFAD. When you talk to graduate students, pretty much, I guess, anywhere, and they hear, climate change, they're very interested typically in the science and the technology, the policy, the political economy, the various aspects of the agenda, but clearly the issue of migrant remittances or even diaspora capital do not surface. EFAD, I don't know if you came up with that, Pedro. You have a wonderful phrase that migrant remittances help 1 billion people achieve their own SDGs. It's a great tagline, and one of those SDGs, of course, is climate action. It might seem, that might seem obvious to some people who look at look at how adaptation works in the real world, where people, economic agents, actually undertake actions to better anticipate, measure, and ultimately respond to a wide range of climate risks. But that's not heretofore how it's been viewed in the parlance autonomous adaptation. There's a lot of that going on. It's already a market, and this large amount of money that is in fact migrant families' money, and which is distinct from diaspora investment, which has a different motive set, there's tremendous potential for providing more options, better incentives, know-how, and ultimately leveraging broader. I thought it was a powerful point, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Been on an airplane for 42 hours. Okay, so with that preface, again, a lot of my students think of it climate change. It's an environmental issue, but it's not how real people frame what is perhaps the greatest challenge, the greatest risk management challenge of our age. People, especially in developing and emerging markets, see this as in social and economic terms: livelihoods, health, property, settlements, families, and so forth. And it is that social and that economic dimension that I believe make the potential of productively using, not channeling, not diverting, certainly not taxing or securitizing, migrant remittances, their money, in a more forward-looking way, not only to help many millions of families, but also generate a lot of local economic development and livelihoods. And with that, I'm going to proceed to, as the moderator, to Pedro de Vasconcelos, who heads the remittances effort and at EFAD. And Pedro, just as a kind of a broad view, what kind of potential do you and your team see with migrant remittances? And if you could talk a bit to diaspora, about the potential for diaspora capital, which we know are very distinct, but how do you see that?
Thank you, Steve. Many years ago at EFAD, when we were looking at the impact of remittances in rural areas, we got humbled by seeing that studies were showing that the part of the remittances that is invested in agriculture dwarfs ODA to agriculture 4 times. And that hasn't changed, and it's increasing. So again, that's very humbling, because this is investment that is directly made in agriculture. It doesn't go through a long chain of things. More recently, in similar studies, and what we're looking at IFAD being very active in climate adaptation issues, we realize the same thing. we're seeing that a lot of the use of remittances is related to things that we find in climate adaptation, as simply put as I can. And it is the reality of not only the migrants, but also what we see is what diaspora is investing back home. The mechanisms that their schemes that they're having their interest to invest in the community of origins, in many cases, is related with climate adaptation. And the interesting thing is that they don't call it like that. Climate adaptation, you don't say it in your day-to-day. Today I invested in my climate adaptation needs. No one does it like that. However, as a diaspora group, we're investing in a well in Somalia because we have issues of access to water. I have a new irrigation system now for my crops because it happens that we don't get the rain that we want. I was able to ride the pandemic and be more resilient because I was receiving remittances. Some of the family members have to migrate because indeed there's droughts, but through the remittances, I am able with my family to stay put in a place we call home. So that we realize this is called climate adaptation. Now, there is 2 universes that are completely untouched, let's say, from the mainstream, but in reality, they're completely intertwined and for some time already. So I think it's almost a crime sometimes not to really take a look into that. How can we facilitate this the same way we're trying to facilitate the access to remittances and their use or mechanisms for investment of the diaspora? We need to look at that much more. Governments need to be aware more of that. Of course, the private sector, there's a tremendous business opportunity that
if I
facilitate
could
and so on.
just
And
quick,
I can go on, I'm sorry.
A quick follow-up. Most of the literature which this phenomenon has been studied intensely for now going on about 25 years. Most of it still tends to lump remittance flows at the household level to consumption. Okay, this is leading the witness, I guess, but do you think more work needs to be done on more granular investigations of what percentage of that could be?
As we say this morning, clearing some of the misconceptions, my number 1 choice was that, consumptions, because we all think about useless things, to be honest. We all think about things that, well, maybe we could go 1 day or a week or maybe a year without. And of course, for those that where remittances represent 60% of your income, they're more than that. So definitely more information is needed on this if you want to have not only adapted policies, but as well as business models that tap into this. We have migrants. No later than last week, I was seeing an investment opportunity that was created, migrants trying to implement access to solar panels technologies in rural Africa, something that they realize could be very beneficial, and try to see if there's a business model that would allow to that. Multiply this through all the needs that 800 million people might have, and even cutting it by half, you see the opportunity there that is really hidden in plain sight and completely untapped.
Thank you. Next, it's an honor to have one of our panelists, Madam Sophia Boli, who is Executive Director of AATI, the African Agricultural Transformation Initiative. Thank you for being available for this. And as the Executive Director of the African Agricultural Transformation Initiative, you see firsthand the challenges on a daily basis posed by worsening climate risks for smallholder farmers in Africa and others in related agricultural pursuits. If remittances and diaspora investment, again, conceptually distinct but fellow travelers, if you will, have the potential to contribute to greater resilience building in rural communities, what do you think needs to be done to maximize the impact of these resources practically?
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this panel and share our experience and our knowledge on this. I'm very delighted that we have the opportunity to bring a few conversations that are taking place at the macro level: agricultural transformation, food security, and climate change, that sometimes do not come in the same conversations. We have a possibility to bring them in one conversation, but also bring it at a more realistic level, at the level of the individual who's farming 1 to 5 acre land and has specific needs, because those are the smallholder farmers we want to be supporting. If you want to alleviate poverty, if you want to create the strong layer of resilience in the economy, SMEs, and so we want to be supporting those firsthand. So just a couple of words about what the AATI does and why this fits into smallholder farmers. We are a young initiative. We are financed by the Gates Foundation, IFAD, McKinsey and Company, and AGRA. And one of our main goals is to strengthen national institutions in helping them achieve their national strategies for agriculture transformation, being climate resilient, and alleviating poverty at the same time. So we finance structures in the Prime Minister's office and Ministry of Agriculture that essentially drive the transformation agenda for agriculture that becomes the drive for economic growth. That is not only at the macro level, supporting national institutions. One of our aims is to ensure that there is enough entry for the private sector, because no economic growth will happen without a strong private sector support as well. So coming back to your question about how this has been impacting smallholders farmers, we have to break it down to, as I said, the individuals who's farming 1 to 5 acre land. What would climate change mean for him? Not only if he's not able to farm his land because of water scarcity, does not have good water harvesting techniques that Pedro has mentioned, and so that he is not able to contribute to the production, he is not able to contribute to the economic growth, his community, his country, he can't help create jobs, and as well. But one of the worst case scenarios would be that he becomes a migrant, and therefore the loss is a more longer term one, as opposed to just a short term one that we could help address through the engagement that we have with them. One of the observations we have had in our discussions with governments to try to bring this at the impact level of smallholders farmers is also that while we do have a lot of conversation about climate finance, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, but in terms of policies, they are written separately in governments, and there is very little integration in them. And when there is a distribution of national resources, budget allocations, and so very little goes to climate adaptation and supporting it from a national perspective. So that means that the finance ministries and the regulators, the heads of the central banks, as we had this morning, the one from Kenya, need to be at the primacy of the discussion to de-risk what climate change is becoming to the economic growth of a country. One of the elements that one of the projects we're running now in Tanzania and in Kenya, we're really at the infancy, is to be able to create climate hubs in agriculture transformation offices. So Kenya has an agriculture transformation office that is meant to drive the transformation agenda in support of the president's office as well. In Tanzania, we're helping design that with the Prime Minister's office and the Minister of Agriculture. Our plan is to have a climate hub in this. And that climate hub would not only help at the macro level, so bring in more integration between these policies when it comes to agriculture transformation, climate adaptation, not it be two different discussions, one at COP, one in food systems discussions, but really one that speaks to the other one. And then comes at the meso level and at the micro level, where we need the strong support from either the private sector or through the remittances and the diaspora investments. So at the meso level, we want to work with communities to create green transformation centers that are driven by the private sector. For that, of course, not only strong seed financing would be helpful, because we're looking at supporting smallholders, farmers first, but also the capacity to go beyond that. And when it comes to the individual level of the farmer, this is where structuring mechanism and financial product to support smallholder farmers comes into. Our goal is to analyze for example, in Kenya, it would be the Garissa County, where there is a stronger impact on the need for climate adaptation. And in Tanzania, it would be the coastline as well, to identify which farmers are really in need of climate adaptation, bring in the technical expertise to define what technology needs to be put in place, and seek the financing for that. Just one last point is about bringing in financing, whether it's diaspora, private sector, to support climate adaptation is not just a one-side conversation. It's an entire ecosystem that needs to be educated.
Right.
You have to educate the diaspora about the need for that. You have to educate the fertilizer companies, the ones that are upstream of the agriculture. You have to educate the seeds company, and you have to educate the financial sector so they actually invest in climate resilient agriculture farming to de-risk challenges in the economy.
Just a very quick follow-up. Do you see the adaptation agenda improving in Africa?
I think there is a great opportunity. I think the momentum that we have now is that we have had a chance to bring adaptation dialogue first and not mitigation, because the adaptation is what impacts the most our challenges. And we are looking at it from a risk to the economy and risk to individuals, same as risk to multinational farms as well. And from that perspective, there is a momentum that we are, I believe, not only moving forward, but we'll get there.
Thank you very much. Next up is Dr. Peter Johnston of the University of Cape Town, who we actually tonight met for the first time, but we've spoken and corresponded in some of the various work that you've done and cooperation. Dr. Johnston is a climate scientist with deep expertise in the agricultural sector in Africa. And we thought we would ask him, while today we're talking about, of course, the potential of remittances and diaspora investment for climate resilience in rural areas. And that's obviously not your primary expertise, but given your extensive experience and expertise in climate-related risks in African agriculture, what do you see as the greatest climate challenges facing smallholders, and where do you think that additional resources could help the most?
Thank you very much, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's very important to realize that agriculture in Africa is very much an individual situation where you've got small-scale farming happening at a large scale, and this contributes to food security within a country. So when we look at climate change, we look at the impacts on those small-scale farmers. And really, it's a case of all climate risk. And it takes one climate event to introduce poverty into that family or into that environment. Now, the idea of combating that is not to look at combating poverty. Staving off poverty is a very short-term goal. I think we need to look at building resilience and sustainability for those farmers. So there are two things that happen. First of all, they're vulnerable to climate risk. And with climate change, that climate risk is catapulting into more extreme events, more very hot days, the incidence of hail, the incidence of extreme rain, and it just goes on, making each individual farmer more and more vulnerable. So the idea of combating this vulnerability is to try and build resilience. And this can be done through investment, very much so, but we need to focus that investment on something that can be useful in maintaining this sustainability. So handouts are out. Handouts don't work unless those handouts are directed at building up an infrastructure whereby farmers have better access to seed, better access to fertilizer, better storage for their crops, better technology about new farming methods, and of course climate information. There are simple things that can be done. Money can be formalized into a community. Someone spoke about a community, I think it was Sophia. There was a project many years ago called the Hunger Project, which tried to build up community centers where seed could be stored, where crops could be stored, where information could be disseminated from. So we're looking at investments that need to happen, things like boreholes that can be sustainable, a resource for water. We're looking at cattle crushes and cattle races where cattle can be dipped, cattle can be treated, cattle can be sorted and sold properly. We're looking at building agri-business resources where new seed, better fertilizer can be marketed within a small group. But also what's important is the way the farmers may be able to get their crops to the market. Very often a climate risk will involve flooded roads, will involve a lack of transport. And this is important to address as well. So it's a multidimensional thing. I don't want to go on, but there are certainly many things that can be looked at. But I think the idea and my point is to try and channel money that's coming in into group collectives where it can benefit the community.
Just a quick follow-up. Do any possible examples come to mind that you think are worthy of replication or learning?
Certainly, there are cooperatives that are formed with their partnerships with commercial farmers, with commercial farming organizations, multinational companies that have an outreach where they reach out to small-scale farmers trying to build up their capacity. They also might be able to facilitate the purchase of something like a tractor, which doesn't always work because someone has to look after the tractor, someone has to maintain the tractor, but this is a start. And if people can be educated into working in communities and working as cooperatives, I think that's the best answer.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Isabel LaRue, Program Manager at the Nordic Development Fund in Helsinki, who was not able to join us. We're sorry about that, but thank you for taking the time to beam in here in the 21st century. The Nordic Development Fund, for those of you who may not know, has been very, very active in promoting climate adaptation and resilience in developing countries, and places a priority, or among their priorities is sub-Saharan Africa. As an example, NDF is partnering with IFAD on the African Rural Climate Adaptation Finance Mechanism, which aims to scale private adaptation finance for smallholders and micro and small enterprises in Africa. Isabel, given the size of remittance flows, do you see the possibility for greater development impact where families and their communities have more options to apply these resources to building resilience?
Thank you, Steve, and I hope you can hear me. Can you confirm?
Yes, loud
Excellent.
and clear.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all, and thanks to IFAD for the invitation to participate in this important dialogue. And I'm so sorry that I cannot be there in person, but great to take part in this panel. And thank you, Steve, for the good question. So as you mentioned, maybe as a bit of a background, the Nordic Development Fund is the joint climate and development finance institution of the Nordic countries. NDF works in the nexus of climate and development with a focus on building the adaptation and resilience capacities of communities in lower income countries against the impacts of climate change, but while also contributing to regional and global climate change mitigation efforts. So in practice, everything that NDF finances is climate relevant. And our current strategy exactly focuses on sub-Saharan Africa, where we actively promote gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. As a concessional financier, our purpose is to channel climate finance to where it matters the most and where we can achieve the highest results and impacts through capital mobilization and the scaling up of climate relevant technologies and services. So through various types of interventions, we have built significant experience, for example, in providing early stage financing to SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa, which has resulted in many valuable learnings. Firstly, about the untapped potential of the market, but also on the critical needs. So one of the key learnings is that local companies in sub-Saharan Africa need adequate and patient capital to grow their businesses and to be able to supply their technologies and products and climate solutions that will help rural households to be firstly prepared, but also to respond to the impacts of climate change. So in this context, NDF channels financing through different types of blended investment facilities, specifically focusing on the access to energy sector and providing financing to companies with clean and off-grid energy solutions, such as, for example, solar home systems, but also services for productive use of energy, for example, in the agricultural value chain. So in addition to supplying products and services to the unmeasurable demand for these services, these companies are also contributing to increasing financial literacy and financial inclusion through innovative payment structures such as pay-as-you-go and rental arrangements for appliances, which, for example, support the generation of credit records for their customers. So in this context, one of NDF's flagship programs is the Energy and Environment Partnership, EEP Africa, which is a clean energy financing facility providing early stage catalytic financing to innovative clean energy businesses across Southern and East Africa. EEP's grant financing is supplemented with technical support, investment facilitation, and knowledge sharing, which is very much needed by early stage and growing companies. In practice, these companies are answering to the demand of climate resilient technologies and solutions in the agricultural sector and by rural households. Examples of the EP portfolio include, for a company with solar irrigation products that enhance climate resilience of smallholder farmers and women-led rural households by enabling reliable access to water for small-scale agriculture. Another company with solar-powered cold storage for livestock value chains is securing the quality of products and strengthening access to markets for pastoralist communities. And the third company is providing electric three-wheeled vehicles on a rent-to-own and lease basis, offering women farmers an affordable e-mobility option to bring their produce to markets. So these are just a few examples of the success stories, but we have so many. The other key learning is that there is a critical need to diversify, scale up, and mobilize capital to address the growing demand for adequate financing instruments that will build and strengthen the resilience of the agricultural sector. In this context, of course, NDF is proud to be IFAD's partner in launching the Africa Rural Climate Adaptation Finance Mechanism, ARCAFIM, which is a new program designed specifically to catalyze and scale up private sector climate change adaptation financing targeting smallholders and rural businesses. This will be done by introducing new instruments into the commercial financial sector. So in addition to mobilizing significant amounts of capital into the agricultural sector and contributing to increasing access to finance and financial inclusion of smallholders, ARCAFIM aims to achieve a shift towards financing models for increased resilience. For example, taxonomy is being developed for climate change adaptation investments. So the idea is that through this taxonomy, it will be possible to consolidate a common understanding for financial institutions and their customers of which are the most optimal interventions to ensure and to strengthen climate change resilience and adaptation, and which are the instruments that are needed to achieve this. So back to your question, Steve, in the context of these learnings, I think that there is an evident role for remittances and the untapped potential that these can actually create and be used to create a virtuous cycle where businesses and households can increase their purchasing power and their access to climate resilient solutions and products, which are being provided by companies. And this cycle will be then strengthened as companies will also get this support to grow their businesses. All of these combined with then, of course, will turn into support for the resilience of rural households, business growth of African companies, and also the development of the financial sector and its capacities to serve agricultural businesses and rural households. So thank you.
Sure. Just a quick follow-up. You're in the donor community, and the Nordic Development Fund is an innovator, I think, on climate resilience and climate adaptation support. Do you see in the broader development donor community real growth prospects for looking at remittances and diaspora capital going forward in this area? I know you can't speak for everybody, but.
Yes, of course. Well, I think that this is a nascent concept. I think that, of course, it's probably the main entry point will be exactly from this, that how can we increase the purchasing power and through remittances to actually then adopt and purchase these, for example, technologies, which will directly enhance climate resilience of households and smallholders. So I think that that's kind of having that shift of the idea that how these remittances can be used and can be injected into the market for resilience. So I think that that's something that hopefully we'll be seeing in the future.
Great, thank you very much. Now
Thank
we
you.
turn to Zachary Levy, who's CEO of Lavoca, an impact investment company and basically doing a lot of creative things in the sustainability and area. And just we know you're kind of new to this framing of climate finance, remittances, and diaspora. Just wanted to see what how you view it, and do you see any potential in that ecosystem going forward downstream?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. And I think maybe to answer your question, I'd like to give maybe 2 concrete examples and maybe a few summary points of maybe where I think we could go. But before I dive into that, let me just state the obvious. And I think the obvious is we can't sit here and talk about the global food system, migration, remittances without talking about climate change. They're so intertwined, and they're so important. And I think we've seen recently a big shift in mentality, particularly in the food and beverage sector. And so today you have 20 companies, major food and beverage companies, who've made very public commitments to net zero and transitioning their supply chains to regenerative agriculture. And like it or not, those commitments will have big implications on small and large farmers who are direct and indirect suppliers. So in Brazil, we've launched a new outcomes-based financing fund focusing on accelerating the transition to regenerative agriculture, partnering with food and beverage companies. Now, to do this and to set it up, we've worked with a number of advanced regenerative farmers. Regenerative agriculture I use as a loose term, for climate-smart practices that are focused on soil health, and it's a much longer discussion. Now, as part of that work with those advanced farmers to set up the fund, we've worked with them to systematize how they did it, that transition, and also build up and work with them on what's the business case, what's the cost benefit, regenerative practices versus traditional practices. And so this is what gets me excited, is that we saw in several key commodities a 90% increase in profit margins, real numbers, real farmers. We saw net emissions reductions of 125%. We saw major benefits around soil moisture content, resilience, biodiversity. And we saw several key commodities going carbon negative within 2 planting cycles. What all this means is there's not a trade-off. It's not about conservation or profits or my livelihood or sustain the environment. You can do this, you can reduce emissions, you can be more resilient, and you can do it in a way that makes sense for your livelihoods. So this fund that I'm referring to, it's outcomes-based. We've partnered with 2 major corporates, food and beverage companies, who are going to be paying based on results, GHGs, soil health, water, such as water use and soil moisture content, and biodiversity. And we're already starting to expand it to 1 country in Southeast Asia, 1 country in Latin America, and hopefully, at some point, we'd love to see how we can really take this to at least 1 or 2 markets here in Africa. So the second example is in Haiti, and where we're working with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, on a $50 million impact-linked fund that's going to work in a lot of sectors, mainly focused on resilience and climate resilience. Haiti is a very different context than Brazil. It's a fragile context with a huge diaspora community. And that part of that fund in one of those sectors will be working with a very interesting initiative called the Haiti Food Systems Alliance. And currently, I have several colleagues that are in DC right now hosting a roundtable on how to engage the diaspora community, diaspora investment into this fund, who in our initial consultations told us they want 2 things. They want yield, it's investment, this is not charity, and they want impact and accountability, right? They just don't want to give money just for the sake of it. They want to see real results, and we're talking about resilience. They want resilience results. And so when we think about this conversation about investment, diaspora, climate, it's about a transition, and it's about changing the system. And what does that mean for me? So first, it's about partnerships, new ways of working with the corporate sector, with the UN, with impact investors, with farmers, agricultural association, research institutions. Second, it's about blended finance. We need new ways to blend different sources of capital. Impact finance, commercial finance, public finance, and you better believe that we can't talk about blended finance and blending different sources of finance if we don't talk about this big elephant in the room that's, to use your words, Pedro, hidden in plain sight, which is the massive flows from migrant communities that are going to rural communities for agriculture. That's adaptation finance. We need to do a better job of accounting for it, and we need to do a better job of mobilizing it. Now, the fourth part is we need better measurement and data, at least for what we're trying to do. That measurement is key. It's about accountability, financial accountability. Are we really actually delivering return, but also the accountability on the impact. We have started through this fund in Brazil to really create those KPIs and metrics, but we need to do a better job of doing better applied research for some of those things like biodiversity or water and climate. And then the fifth is we need to do a better job of partnering with groups like IFAD, the UN, on conducting an NDF applied research. To really make this happen, we need a robust business case, and we need a robust cost-benefit analysis, and we need concrete transition protocols to make it happen. And I think the final part of it is, and just to sum up, is we need to start to think about the market ecosystem that is wrapped around all this, because it's going to be new players. One of the biggest challenges we're seeing already is to scale this type of work requires a whole new set of actors, and right now in most countries, they're startups, they're small, they're not your traditional chemical input companies, it's just the opposite, and we need to start to build those capacities and those opportunities. And I think when we think about remittances and diaspora investment, what does that ecosystem need to be looking like to also better mobilize that ecosystem for adaptation finance? And I think the opportunity is huge, and I think we're almost there.
Great. Quick follow-up. Could you, for the audience, talk a little bit about why you think outcomes-based finance is distinct and growing in popularity among large clients?
As a firm, we're an impact investment firm. We're mission-driven. We like financial structures that can link financial return to impact. We think it drives accountability, and we think it drives better investments, and we think it drives innovation. And so when we think about impact investing, it's a spectrum of type of investment, but really it's a huge amount of investment capital that sits on the sidelines that if it can be given yield and impact, it's there to mobilize. And so we think these types of structures, and I think in particular this sector, that measurement and outcomes focus makes a lot of sense. The corporates get it. It's about performance. For them it's, okay, I improve soil quality, I reduce cost, I reduce emissions, I hit my targets. But it's also about measurement to make sure you're transitioning properly. So if you're not just eliminating chemical inputs and all of a sudden you have pest disease, but you're doing it in a way where you're measuring and monitoring in a way that makes sense. And I think these types of structures get everybody to just really focus on what matters. In the case of regenerative agriculture, it's about soil health. Focus on that, right? And those types of structures, there are measurement costs around it, but in the end, it actually benefits everybody. So that's what we believe. I think we're getting a lot of traction around it, and I think there's a reason for it.
Thank you. Tomorrow is going to be for questions and answers, but we have a few minutes, and we're standing in front of apparently a free cocktail, so I don't want to push this envelope too hard. But does anybody have a question or an intervention on what we have? Madam? Does the microphone not work? There it goes.
Is that better?
Yeah.
And that was an amazing panel. I learned so much. Thank you. I had a quick question for Zachary. In the other markets in which you've worked, have you seen the use of agricultural crowdfunding as a tool, a sort of non-standard intermediary through which to fund grassroots organizations, farmer cooperatives, projects that are really in sort of operating in spaces where institutional funds are just never going to be able to do deals?
So I missed the first part of that question.
In the other markets in which you've worked,
Yeah.
have you seen the use of what we call agri-crowdfunding? The use of crowdfunding, I'm guessing it's a no by your reaction. But yeah.
So we're just getting started. I mean, typically when we're talking about impact investing, a lot of our partners traditionally have been private banks, more high net worth individuals. In the case of Haiti, because it's such a huge diaspora community, and we're really keen to both engage and mobilize investment, two different things, the Haitian diaspora. We're trying to look at and think through a little bit what those types of structures and products could be. We're not there yet, and actually I'm really humbly here. I'm trying to learn and I think welcome anybody's thoughts around that. In the conversations we've had, the interest is there, and we're really keen to start to kind of test and build those structures around it. But I think crowdfunding, particularly when we're talking about smaller investors, we think that is definitely a tool and could be.
Yeah, it is. Happy to share stories from West Africa about diaspora
Love it. Love it.
investors in agri.
Would love it.
No? Oh. Is it turned on?
Thank you, Sister Rose Tomito, co-founder of Mother Kevin Providence Social Enterprise. I use organic farming to transform the lives of the vulnerable women and young people at the grassroots. At the moment, I'm establishing irrigation scheme with the award that we have received from USDF, with the support of the African Diaspora Network. My question here is that how do we tap more financial support to help these grassroots people to make use of this irrigation and enter into investment that can enable them increase their production and increase their income so as to become financial independent. And secondly, Uganda is very resourceful with a lot of healthy, fresh food which needs to be added value addition. Can somebody in this hall or any institution come to our support, come to help us to make use of these resources, add value to them in order to attend to the nutritional needs in our society? Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia.
So very briefly, Uganda is a beautiful country. Spent 5 years there. Would love to go back as well and see. I think the process is one of a broader education first, right? People need to understand and see climate change, adaptation, impact on agriculture as a risk to business, as a risk to sustainability, as a risk to growth. And then once we have that education of the diaspora about how this needs to be one aspect where people should mobilize behind, we also have to do it with an entire ecosystem. We have to do it with the financial partners. We have to do it with the regulators so that they allow lower taxation, they facilitate the flow of the funding. But what has been working well in some countries, in my country, in Mali, we have a lot of microfinance institutions that are used sometimes through cooperative to channel some of the funds as well in terms of the diaspora, standing remittances or investments. In Kenya, we have cooperatives in SACCOs that almost behave the same way as the lady from South Africa has mentioned, the crowdfunding for agribusiness is also one tool that has been used for grassroots SMEs development. So it is a multi-stakeholder engagement. It starts with understanding and accepting at the very high level that climate change is a major risk to economic growth and sustainability. And then based on that, have everyone around it to be able to establish the mechanism that support it. Thank you.
Yeah, one gentleman over here. Yeah, yes, just last one. Okay.
Hi, yeah, Raul Hinojosa. To answer the question I think you first asked Pedro, how do you make the connections between remittances and specifically investments in resilience? There's an experience that we work with in Mexico with you have to work, there's an intermediate level that hasn't been discussed much at the conference, which is local community credit unions that can actually intermediate remittances so that it's not it is the people's money, but the people's money is saved. And just like we all have banks, right? We spend money all the time, but that money is used, right? That's what you need to have an infrastructure. That's resilient infrastructure. And there can be ways to turn that into sustainable bonds, green bonds, where immigrants want to save money. That's why they travel, in fact, to try to save the money. So you need to create the institutions and then the products for these investments. And then finally, there are plenty of focused investments that they're seeking to make their communities resilient. I think that could be the missing link that is essential here for us to mobilize this next stage.
Thank you. Again, tomorrow we can continue on this bilaterally or in small groups, or even tonight, I guess, for people who'd like to engage over a cocktail. But I think the feeling was they wanted us to keep to a 6 o'clock, which we've already blown. I just one last final thought. We are talking about global risk management, and it occurs to me that migrant families, remittance receiving families, know all about risk. They suffered mightily to lose a family member, to have to leave, go abroad to send money home because of risk. This is a group that is going to recognize the opportunities when the options arise here, because obviously one person's risk can be somebody else's opportunity. In any case, with that, thank you all very much, and please, oh, Pedro, sorry.
I just wanted to add something. The gentleman that just spoke before, his name is Raul Hinojosa, and I just want to say, the reason why we're all today here can be traced to that person, because he is the one 23 years ago who talked to a person, actually the manager of the Multilateral Investment Fund of the IDB, about this interesting aspect of remittances that was absolutely anecdotal, that no government wanted to touch because it was dirty money. First, it's poor people. Second, it's just money laundering. That was the narrative in the year 2000, at the end of the year 2000. The events of 2001 didn't help either. But this is where it basically started. I'm very happy to see today that once again we're humbled to see what millions of migrants and their families are doing, and they're not asking anything. We're asking them, how can they help us do our job better? Most of them, let's be honest, feel that they have been failed by the system, had to migrate. They're not asking anything in return. And here we come, little by little, noticing over 20 years that they invest more in agriculture. I did my little calculation. By the end of this forum, $200 million will be invested in agriculture by diaspora. By remittance families, not diaspora. You can add on that. $200 million by this forum. You just think about that, and you can do the math, and it will work out. So this is, again, humbling. And then again, now we're seeing that in climate adaptation, the list goes on, and they do the same thing. So I think tomorrow we will go into more details. about this. And again, we will also have more questions and answers. Today was more of a plenary marathon, but tomorrow we're going to interact much more. But I just wanted to make that point in conclusion from our end. Thank
Very
you.
good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And that concludes this session. Tomorrow we will be talking in more depth on diaspora investment, so you're all welcome and encouraged to attend that as well.